Before we dive into this incredible story that will restore your faith in humanity, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss stories like this one. Today, I'm going to tell you about Sarah Mitchell, a brilliant architect whose wedding day became a moment that changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed what happened. Sarah had always been different, not just because she was born with dwarfism, but because she possessed an extraordinary mind that could envision buildings and spaces in ways that left even seasoned architects amazed. At 28, she had already made a name for herself in the competitive world of architectural design, working for one of the most prestigious firms in New York City. Her portfolio included sustainable housing projects that had won international awards, and her innovative approach to accessibility in urban planning had been featured in Architectural Digest twice. But Sarah's journey to success hadn't been easy. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she faced countless challenges that went far beyond the physical limitations others assumed she had. Her parents, both teachers, had instilled in her the belief that her mind was her greatest asset, but the outside world wasn't always as understanding. Throughout school, she endured whispers, stares, and the kind of casual cruelty that children can inflict without fully understanding the lasting impact of their words. The turning point came when Sarah was 12 years old. Her school was planning a science fair, and while other kids were building volcano models and growing bean plants, Sarah presented a detailed architectural model of an earthquake-resistant building design. Her project wasn't just impressive for a 12-year-old, it was genuinely innovative, incorporating principles of engineering that many high school students hadn't even learned yet. That day, her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, pulled her aside and said something that would change everything. "Sarah, you don't just think differently because you're small. You think differently because you're brilliant. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words became Sarah's mantra as she navigated through high school, where she graduated as valedictorian, and then through college, where she earned her architecture degree magna cum laude from MIT. Every achievement was hard-won, not because she lacked ability, but because she constantly had to prove that ability to people who saw her height before they saw her talent. When Sarah moved to New York City 5 years ago, she thought she was leaving those challenges behind. The city was supposed to be different, more progressive, more accepting. And in many ways, it was. Her colleagues at Hartwell and Associates respected her work, her boss valued her innovative ideas, and her projects were making a real difference in how people thought about inclusive design. It was at a sustainable architecture conference in Manhattan where Sarah met David Chen, an environmental engineer who worked for a green technology startup. David was tall, incredibly tall at 6'4", with kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. What struck Sarah most about their first conversation wasn't how he looked down at her. Literally everyone had to look down at her, but how he looked at her. He saw her, really saw her, not as someone to be pitied or inspired by, but as an equal, as a brilliant professional, as a woman worthy of respect and admiration. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared values about sustainability, long conversations about innovative design, and a mutual appreciation for each other's expertise. David never treated Sarah like she was fragile or needed protection. Instead, he challenged her ideas, debated architectural theories with her, and supported her ambitions in ways that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. When David proposed after 2 years of dating, he didn't get down on one knee, a gesture that Sarah had always dreaded because of how it emphasized their height difference. Instead, he took her to the rooftop of a building she had designed, a low-income housing complex that had been featured in the New York Times for its innovative accessibility features. Against the backdrop of her own architectural achievement, with the city lights twinkling below, he asked her to marry him while standing, looking directly into her eyes, treating her exactly as he always had, as his equal, his partner, his love. The engagement period was blissful. Sarah threw herself into wedding planning with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to her architectural projects. She researched venues, coordinated with vendors, and designed every aspect of their special day. She even sketched custom altar arrangements that would ensure both she and David would be visible to all their guests, regardless of their height difference. But as the wedding day approached, Sarah began to notice something that made her stomach twist with a familiar dread. It started with small comments from vendors. The florist, assuming David couldn't hear, whispered to her assistant about how unusual the couple was. The photographer made several suggestions about angles that might minimize the difference between the bride and groom. The venue coordinator kept asking if they needed any special accommodations, in a tone that made it clear she saw Sarah as a problem to be solved rather than a bride to be celebrated. The worst moment came during the final dress fitting, just 1 week before the wedding. Sarah had chosen a beautiful, elegant dress that made her feel radiant and confident. But as she stood in front of the mirror in the boutique, she overheard 2 other customers talking behind a nearby curtain. "Did you see that little bride in there?" one said. "I don't understand what that tall man sees in her. It's going to look so strange in their wedding photos. I feel sorry for both of them, honestly." Sarah felt her heart shatter. All the confidence she had built, all the love David had shown her, all the success she had achieved, none of it seemed to matter in that moment. She was right back to being the 12-year-old girl who felt like the whole world was staring at her, judging her, finding her lacking. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about walking down the aisle, about the looks she might receive, about the whispers that might follow her throughout what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. For the first time since she had met David, Sarah began to wonder if perhaps everyone else was right. Maybe their love, no matter how genuine, wasn't enough to overcome the challenges they would face as a couple. Maybe she was being selfish by marrying him, by potentially subjecting him to a lifetime of stares and questions and assumptions. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that would make for beautiful outdoor ceremony photos. Sarah woke up in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, where she was getting ready with her bridesmaids. Her mother, sensing her daughter's anxiety, tried to offer reassurance, but Sarah could see the worry in her eyes too. Even her own mother, who had always been her biggest supporter, seemed nervous about how the day would unfold. As Sarah sat in her wedding dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids who were busy with last-minute preparations, she felt increasingly disconnected from the joy that should have filled the room. Her maid of honor, Jessica, her college roommate and closest friend, noticed something was wrong immediately. Jessica had been there through Sarah's entire journey, from their late-night study sessions at MIT to celebrating Sarah's first major architectural commission. She knew Sarah better than anyone, and she could see that behind the carefully applied makeup and the beautiful dress, her friend was struggling. "Sarah, honey, you look absolutely stunning, but I can tell something's bothering you," Jessica said, kneeling beside Sarah's chair so they could talk at eye level, a gesture that Jessica had naturally adopted years ago, not out of pity, but out of genuine friendship and respect. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Sarah tried to smile, tried to push down the growing anxiety that had been building for weeks, but she couldn't hold it back anymore. "Jess, what if everyone's right? What if David and I look ridiculous together? What if our wedding photos become some kind of spectacle that people share online for all the wrong reasons? What if I'm ruining the most important day of his life?" The other bridesmaids stopped what they were doing, their expressions shifting from pre-wedding excitement to genuine concern. These weren't just random friends Sarah had asked to stand beside her. They were women who had witnessed her strength, her accomplishments, and her unwavering determination over the years. They had seen her present innovative designs to skeptical clients and win them over with her brilliance. They had watched her navigate professional challenges that would have broken lesser people. But right now, their accomplished, confident friend was crumbling under the weight of other people's judgments. "Sarah Mitchell," Jessica said firmly, taking her friend's hands, "I need you to listen to me, and I mean really listen. Do you remember when you designed that community center in Brooklyn? The one that everyone said couldn't be done because of the budget constraints and the challenging lot dimensions?" Sarah nodded weakly, remembering the project that had almost ended her career before it truly began. The client had been ready to walk away, convinced that creating an accessible, beautiful, and functional community space on such a tight budget was impossible. "You didn't just prove them wrong," Jessica continued. "You created something so incredible that it won 3 national awards and changed how architects approach community spaces. You took what everyone saw as limitations and turned them into innovations. That's who you are, Sarah. You don't shrink from challenges, you transform them into triumphs." Meanwhile, downstairs in the venue, David was having his own moment of realization, though for completely different reasons. He was adjusting his tie in the groom's preparation room when his best man, Marcus, mentioned something that made David's blood run cold. "Man, I overheard some of the older guests talking outside," Marcus said casually, not realizing the impact his words would have. "They're making some pretty ignorant comments about you and Sarah. I shut them down, of course, but I thought you should know there might be some tension during the ceremony." David stopped adjusting his tie and turned to face his friend, his expression serious. "What kind of comments?" Marcus hesitated, clearly regretting bringing it up now, just minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. "Just ignorant stuff, man. You know how some people can be. They don't understand what real love looks like. They think love is about matching heights or looking like you stepped out of some magazine spread." David felt a surge of protective anger, not just for himself, but for Sarah. He had seen how the world treated her, had witnessed the casual cruelty of strangers who made assumptions based on appearance alone. What broke his heart wasn't the ignorance of others, he had expected that, unfortunately, but the thought that Sarah might be upstairs right now, hearing similar comments and letting them poison what should be the happiest day of their lives. "Marcus," David said, his voice steady but determined, "I need you to do me a favor. Go upstairs and check on Sarah. Don't make it obvious, but I need to know if she's okay. And if anyone, I mean anyone, says anything inappropriate to her, I want to know about it immediately." Back in the bridal suite, Sarah's anxiety had reached a breaking point. She stood up from her chair, her wedding dress rustling around her, and walked to the window that overlooked the ceremony area. Below, she could see guests beginning to take their seats, and she found herself studying their faces, wondering which ones had already formed judgments about her, which ones were attending out of genuine happiness for the couple, and which ones were there for the spectacle. "I can't do this," Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't walk down that aisle knowing that people are going to be staring at us, thinking about how mismatched we look, feeling sorry for David, or worse, making jokes about us." The room fell silent except for the gentle sounds of the pre-ceremony activities drifting up from below. Sarah's mother, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke up. "Sarah, sweetheart, do you remember what your father told you when you were deciding whether to take that job in New York?" Sarah turned from the window, tears threatening to ruin her carefully applied makeup. She remembered the conversation well. She had been terrified to leave Ohio, afraid that the big city would be even more challenging for someone like her. "He said that courage isn't about not being afraid," her mother continued. "It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You were scared to move to New York, but you did it because you knew it was where you belonged. You were nervous about taking on those big architectural projects, but you did it because you knew you could make a difference. And you fell in love with David not despite your fears about how the world might judge you, but because he showed you that love transcends all of those surface concerns." Jessica stood up and joined Sarah at the window. "Look down there, Sarah. Really look. Do you see David's grandmother in the front row? She's been so excited about this wedding that she's called you 3 times this week just to tell you how proud she is to be gaining you as a granddaughter. Do you see your old professor from MIT? He flew all the way from Boston because he said he wouldn't miss seeing one of his most brilliant students marry the love of her life." Sarah made it halfway down the hallway before the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. She found herself in a small alcove near the venue's garden entrance, hidden from the main flow of wedding guests but still close enough to hear the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle music that was supposed to signal the beginning of her ceremony in just 20 minutes. She sat down on a small bench, not caring that her expensive wedding dress might get wrinkled or dirty. Nothing seemed to matter in that moment except the overwhelming feeling that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Not because she didn't love David, but because she loved him too much to saddle him with a lifetime of awkward stares, whispered comments, and the kind of attention that no couple should have to endure. As she sat there crying, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. She looked up, expecting to see Jessica or one of her bridesmaids coming to retrieve her, but instead she saw a distinguished older man in an expensive suit walking toward her. She didn't recognize him, though something about his bearing suggested he was someone important. He had silver hair, kind but sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, quickly wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. "I didn't mean to. I was just getting some air before the ceremony." The man smiled gently and gestured to the other end of the bench. "May I sit? I find that some of life's most important conversations happen in moments like these." Sarah nodded, curious despite her emotional state. As the man settled beside her, she noticed that he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who was used to being watched, used to having his words and actions carry weight. "You must be Sarah," he said, and his voice carried a warmth that immediately put her at ease. "I'm William Morrison. I'm here as David's guest, though I suspect he didn't mention me specifically." The name hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. William Morrison was one of the most successful real estate developers in the country, known for his massive commercial projects and his billions of dollars in assets. More importantly, he was known for his philanthropic work and his commitment to sustainable development. Sarah had studied his projects in graduate school and had always admired his approach to combining profitability with environmental responsibility. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, her tears temporarily forgotten in her surprise. "I know your work. Your Seattle waterfront development project was actually part of my thesis research at MIT." William's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Really? What was your thesis about?" Despite her emotional state, Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation. It was about integrating accessibility features into large-scale urban development without compromising aesthetic or functional design. Your Seattle project was one of the few examples where universal design principles were seamlessly incorporated into a luxury development. "And what was your conclusion?" William asked, leaning forward with the kind of attention that Sarah was used to receiving from colleagues, not from billionaire developers at her wedding. "That the best design happens when architects stop thinking about accommodating differences and start thinking about celebrating them," Sarah said, her professional passion momentarily overriding her personal crisis. "When you designed those ramped walkways with the integrated seating areas, you didn't just make the space accessible. You made it more beautiful and more functional for everyone." William nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Sarah, I've been in the development business for 40 years. And I've learned that the most successful projects are the ones where perceived limitations become innovative solutions. The Seattle project you mentioned. It almost didn't happen because my board of directors thought the accessibility requirements would be too expensive and too complicated." Sarah found herself fully engaged despite her earlier panic. "But you pushed forward anyway." "I did, because I realized that when you design for inclusion from the beginning, you don't create limitations, you create possibilities that you never would have discovered otherwise." William paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. "I suspect you've experienced something similar in your own work." Sarah nodded, thinking about her various projects over the years. "Every time I've been asked to design something with accessibility in mind, the end result has been more innovative and more beautiful than what I originally envisioned. It forces you to think differently, to find creative solutions that benefit everyone." "Exactly," William said. "And I imagine that principle applies to more than just architecture." Sarah felt a shift in the conversation, sensing that William was leading somewhere specific. "What do you mean?" William smiled, and Sarah saw something in his expression that reminded her of her father, a kind of gentle wisdom that came from years of experience and genuine care for others. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about why I'm here today, and why this conversation is so important to me." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. 35 years ago, I was supposed to marry a woman named Catherine. She was brilliant, accomplished, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. But Catherine had a visible disability. She used a wheelchair after a car accident in college. I was young, and I was terrified of what people would think. I was worried about my business reputation, about how we would look together at corporate events, about whether I was strong enough to handle the challenges that might come with our relationship. Sarah felt her heart sink, sensing where this story was heading. "So I called off the wedding," William continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I convinced myself that I was protecting both of us, that we would be happier apart. Catherine was devastated, of course, but she was also gracious in a way that I didn't deserve. She told me that she understood, that she hoped I would find happiness, and that she forgave me. Sarah found herself holding her breath, completely absorbed in William's story. Catherine went on to become one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the country, William said. She married a wonderful man who saw her strength and intelligence before he saw anything else. They had 3 beautiful children and built a life together that was everything I was too scared to imagine for us. And you? Sarah asked softly. I built an empire, William said with a bitter smile. I made billions of dollars, bought houses all over the world, dated women who looked perfect in photographs. And I spent every single day of the last 35 years regretting the biggest mistake I ever made. Sarah felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't just for her own situation. Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for me, Sarah, William said firmly. Be sorry for Catherine, who deserved better than my cowardice. Be sorry for the life we could have built together if I had been brave enough to choose love over fear. He turned to face her directly. But mostly, be sorry for yourself if you're about to make the same mistake I did. Sarah stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy blanket. How did you know? I mean, why are you telling me this? Because David works for me, William said simply. Not directly, but his startup is one of my investments. When he told me he was getting married, he couldn't stop talking about this brilliant architect he had fallen in love with. He described your work, your passion, your intelligence, and the way you approached every challenge as an opportunity for innovation. He never once mentioned your height, Sarah, because that's not what he sees when he looks at you. Sarah felt her breath catch as William continued. But then, a few weeks ago, I heard him on a phone call with someone. I think it was his sister, and he was worried. He said you seemed anxious about the wedding, that you were second-guessing things, and he was terrified that he had somehow failed to show you how much he loved and respected you. He's never failed at that, Sarah said quickly. David has been nothing but loving and supportive. This isn't about him. It's about me, about my own insecurities and fears. I know, William said gently. That's exactly what makes this situation so tragic and so familiar. Catherine didn't doubt my love either, Sarah. She doubted whether love was enough to overcome the challenges we might face together. Just like you're doing right now. William Morrison's words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt something shifting inside her chest. Not the crushing weight of anxiety she had been carrying, but something lighter, clearer, like a fog beginning to lift. She looked at this distinguished man beside her, a billionaire who could have anything he wanted in the world, and saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability, regret, and a deep desire to prevent someone else from making his mistake. Mr. Morrison, Sarah said slowly, why are you really here? I mean, you could have invested in David's company without ever meeting me. You could have sent a representative to the wedding, or just sent a gift. Why did you come personally? William smiled, and for a moment his carefully composed business exterior cracked, revealing something much more human underneath. Because, Sarah, when you get to be my age and you've achieved everything the world says should make you happy, you realize that the only things that truly matter are the connections we make and the love we choose to embrace or reject. I came here because I wanted to meet the woman who inspired David to talk about architecture and sustainability with the same passion most people reserve for discussing their children. He paused, looking out toward the garden where guests were still gathering. But I also came because I hoped that if the moment arose, if you needed to hear it, I could tell you what I wish someone had told me 35 years ago. Which is, that the people who matter won't care about anything except your happiness, and the people who care about superficial things don't matter at all. William's voice grew stronger, more certain. Sarah, I've spent decades in boardrooms with some of the most powerful people in the world. I've negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the only thing that impressed me about any of those people was their character, their intelligence, and their ability to solve problems that others couldn't solve. Sarah felt her breathing slow as she listened, really listened, to what he was saying. Do you know what David told me about you when he first mentioned your name? William continued. He said you were the only architect he had ever met who could look at a seemingly impossible building site and immediately see 3 different ways to turn the constraints into advantages. He said you approached every project like a puzzle that was waiting to reveal its perfect solution. Despite her tears, Sarah found herself smiling slightly. That sounded exactly like something David would say. He also told me about the housing project you designed in Queens, William said. The one where you convinced the developers to include a community garden by showing them how green space could actually increase property values while reducing maintenance costs. That project is now being used as a model for sustainable affordable housing across the country. Sarah nodded, remembering the project that had taken 2 years of her life and had nearly driven her to exhaustion with its complexity and the resistance she had faced from contractors who didn't believe in her vision. That housing project will provide homes for over 300 families, Sarah. 300 families who will live in beautiful, affordable, environmentally sustainable homes because you refused to accept that low-income housing had to be ugly or poorly designed. William's voice grew more passionate. Do you think any of those families care about your height? Do you think the children who will grow up in those homes, playing in the community garden you designed, will remember anything about you except that you gave them a better life? Sarah felt something breaking open inside her chest. Not breaking apart, but breaking open, like a door that had been locked for too long finally opening to let light in. And yet, William continued, his voice gentle but insistent, you're sitting here on your wedding day, ready to walk away from love because you're worried about what strangers might think when they see your wedding photos. The truth of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent years fighting for respect in her professional life, demanding that people see her ideas before they saw her physical differences, insisting that her work speak for itself. She had built a career on the principle that design should be inclusive and that the best solutions came from embracing constraints rather than trying to hide from them. And yet here she was, ready to reject the love of her life because she was afraid of being seen, afraid of being judged, afraid of standing out. I've been such a hypocrite, Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to William. I tell my clients that the best design celebrates differences instead of hiding them. I've spent my entire career proving that limitations can become innovations. But when it comes to my own life, I've been trying to make myself invisible. Not invisible, William corrected gently. You've been trying to protect yourself, which is completely understandable. But protection and hiding are 2 different things, Sarah. Protecting yourself means building a life surrounded by people who value you for who you are. Hiding means depriving the world of your talents and depriving yourself of love because you're afraid of people who were never worthy of your attention in the first place. Sarah looked toward the garden again, and this time she saw the scene differently. Instead of a group of people waiting to judge her, she saw David's grandmother, who had spent 20 minutes on the phone last week describing the dress she had bought specifically for Sarah's wedding. She saw her college friends, who had driven from 3 different states to be there. She saw her parents, who had never once suggested that she should settle for less than everything she wanted in life. Sarah, William said, standing up and extending his hand to her, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer as an architect, not as a bride. Sarah looked up at him, puzzled but curious. Okay. If a client came to you and said they wanted to build something beautiful, something that would stand as a testament to love and commitment, but they were worried that some people might not understand the design, would you tell them to abandon the project? Sarah almost laughed despite her tears. No, of course not. I'd tell them that the most beautiful buildings are often the ones that challenge people's expectations. I'd tell them that if they tried to design something that pleased everyone, they'd end up with something generic that pleased no one. And what would you tell them about the people who criticized their vision? I'd tell them that people who can't see beauty in innovative design probably aren't their ideal clients anyway, Sarah said, the words coming automatically from years of professional experience. William smiled broadly. Exactly. So why are you applying different standards to your own life than you would apply to your work? Sarah stared at him, feeling the full weight of the parallel he had drawn. She was literally sitting in her wedding dress, ready to abandon the most important project of her life, building a marriage with David, because she was worried about critics who would never understand or appreciate their design. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I've been thinking about this all wrong." "How so?" "I've been thinking about our wedding like it's something I need to apologize for or explain, instead of something I should be proud of and excited to share with the world." Sarah stood up, her wedding dress rustling around her, and for the first time all day, she felt like a bride instead of like someone playing dress-up in someone else's life. "Sarah," William said, his voice filled with something that sounded almost like pride, "I've spent 40 years in business, and I can recognize a breakthrough moment when I see one. What are you going to do now?" Sarah looked toward the garden, where she could see David's tall figure near the altar, probably wondering where she was and whether she was okay. She thought about all the times he had supported her professional dreams, all the ways he had shown her that her height was just one small detail in the vast landscape of who she was as a person. "I'm going to go marry the love of my life," she said, and for the first time in weeks, her voice carried the kind of certainty she brought to her most challenging architectural projects. "And I'm going to do it with my head held high, because we're not apologizing for who we are, we're celebrating it." William Morrison watched as Sarah's entire demeanor transformed before his eyes. The woman who had been sitting beside him in tears just minutes ago now stood with the kind of confidence he recognized from watching her present her architectural designs in the business meetings David had described. This was Sarah Mitchell, the accomplished professional, Sarah Mitchell, the innovative thinker, Sarah Mitchell, the woman who turned constraints into masterpieces. "There's just one more thing I need to tell you," William said as Sarah prepared to head back inside. "And this might be the most important part of our entire conversation." Sarah turned back to him, curious and now fully present in a way she hadn't been all day. "Catherine, the woman I told you about, the one I was too scared to marry 35 years ago?" William's voice carried a weight that made Sarah listen even more carefully. "She passed away last year. Cancer. I found out through a mutual friend who knew about our history." Sarah's hand flew to her chest, her heart breaking for this woman she had never met but felt connected to through William's story. "I went to her funeral," William continued. "I stood in the back, watching her husband and children say goodbye to a woman who had clearly lived an extraordinary life. Her oldest son spoke about how his mother had taught him that true strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with grace and dignity. Her daughter talked about how Catherine had shown her that love means choosing someone every single day, especially on the days when the world makes that choice difficult. William's voice grew softer, more reflective. But what struck me most was what her husband said. He talked about their first date, how nervous he had been, not because of her wheelchair, but because he was intimidated by her intelligence and her accomplishments. He said that loving Catherine had made him a better man, not because he had to take care of her, but because she challenged him to see the world differently, to fight for justice in ways he never would have discovered on his own. Sarah felt tears in her eyes again, but these were different tears. Tears of understanding rather than fear. "That funeral changed something fundamental in how I understood my own cowardice," William said. "I had convinced myself that I was protecting Catherine by walking away, but the truth was I was only protecting myself. I robbed both of us of the chance to build something beautiful together, something that could have made us both stronger and better." Sarah nodded, seeing the parallel to her own situation with startling clarity. "So when David mentioned that his brilliant architect fiancé seemed to be having doubts about their wedding, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch another person make my mistake." William smiled, and Sarah saw genuine warmth in his expression. "I'm not here as a wedding guest, Sarah. I'm here as someone who learned too late that love requires courage, and courage requires us to be vulnerable in front of people who might not understand us." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward this man who had shared his most painful regret with a stranger because he wanted to spare her from similar pain. "Mr. Morrison, I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by walking down that aisle and showing the world what it looks like when two people choose love over fear," William said. "And you can thank me by building the kind of marriage that Catherine and I never got the chance to build." Sarah straightened her dress, checked her appearance in the window's reflection, and felt something she hadn't experienced all day, excitement about marrying David. Not anxiety about how they would look together, not worry about other people's opinions, but pure joy about starting their life as husband and wife. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. As they walked back toward the venue together, Sarah saw Jessica rushing toward them, clearly frantic with worry. "Sarah! Thank God I found you. Everyone's been looking for you. David is worried sick, and your parents are trying to keep the guests calm, and the photographer is asking whether we should delay the ceremony." "Jessica," Sarah said, cutting off her friend's anxious rambling, "tell everyone that the bride is ready. More than ready. Tell David that I'll see him at the altar in 5 minutes, and tell him that I love him more than I've ever loved anything in my life." Jessica stared at her friend, clearly puzzled by the transformation but relieved to see Sarah's confidence returning. "Are you sure you're okay? What happened? Who is this?" "This is Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, "and he just reminded me of something I had forgotten about myself." "Which is?" "That I don't design buildings to hide from the world. I design them to make the world better. And I shouldn't approach my marriage any differently." As they reached the bridal suite, Sarah's mother and bridesmaids swarmed around her, all talking at once, checking her makeup, adjusting her dress, and expressing relief that she was back. But through all the commotion, Sarah felt centered and calm in a way she hadn't experienced in weeks. "Mom," Sarah said, taking her mother's hands, "I need you to know that I'm not nervous anymore. I'm excited. I'm proud. And I'm ready to marry David in front of everyone who matters to us." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but these were tears of joy and relief. "Oh, sweetheart, I can see it in your face. You look like yourself again." The music began to play, signaling that it was time for the processional to begin. As Sarah's bridesmaids lined up and began their walk down the aisle, Sarah took one last look in the mirror. For the first time all day, she loved what she saw. Not just the beautiful dress or the carefully applied makeup, but the confidence in her eyes, the strength in her posture, and the joy radiating from her entire being. William Morrison appeared beside her one last time as she prepared to take her father's arm. "Sarah, it has been an honor to meet you and to play a small part in what I know will be a beautiful marriage. But before you go, I have one last thing to give you." He handed her a small envelope. "This is a letter that Catherine wrote to me after I called off our wedding. I've carried it with me for 35 years, and I think it's time for someone else to have it. Don't read it now, save it for when you need a reminder of your own strength." Sarah accepted the envelope with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what he was giving her. "Mr. Morrison, this is too precious. You should keep it." "No," he said firmly. "Catherine would want it to help someone else choose courage over fear. She would want her words to make a difference in your life the way your courage today has made a difference in mine." As Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she felt every eye upon her, but instead of shrinking from the attention, she embraced it. These people were here to witness love, to celebrate commitment, and to support her and David as they began their journey together. When she saw David waiting for her at the altar, his face lighting up with relief and joy and absolute adoration, she knew with complete certainty that William Morrison had been right about everything. David's eyes never left hers as she approached, and in his gaze she saw reflected back everything she had forgotten about herself over the past few weeks. She saw her intelligence, her creativity, her strength, and her beauty, not despite her height, but including every aspect of who she was. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was complete and supportive. When David and Sarah exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking about building a life together based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support for each other's ambitions, there wasn't a dry eye in the ceremony area. And when they kissed as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, filled with genuine joy from people who had witnessed not just a wedding, but a celebration of love's triumph over fear. Later, during the reception, William Morrison approached the newlyweds during a quiet moment between toasts. "Sarah, David, congratulations on a beautiful ceremony and an even more beautiful future ahead of you." "Mr. Morrison," David said, shaking the older man's hand, "I still can't believe you came. Having you here means more than you know." "Actually," William said with a smile, "I think it means exactly as much as I hoped it would." He turned to Sarah. "You were magnificent today. Catherine would have been proud. As the evening continued, filled with dancing, laughter, and celebration, Sarah found herself thinking about the letter William had given her, safely tucked away in her bridal suite upstairs. She didn't need to read it tonight. Tonight was for joy, for dancing with her new husband, for celebrating with family and friends who had supported their love from the beginning. But she knew that someday, when she faced new challenges or moments of doubt, Catherine's words would be there to remind her that love requires courage, that courage requires vulnerability, and that the most beautiful things in life happen when we choose to embrace our authentic selves rather than hide from them. As Sarah and David swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife, she whispered in his ear, "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, from the very beginning." David pulled back to look at her, his eyes full of love and wonder. "Sarah, you've been impossible to miss from the moment I met you. You're the brightest light in every room you enter." And as they continued to dance, surrounded by love and support and genuine celebration, Sarah knew that their marriage would be like her best architectural projects: innovative, beautiful, strong, and designed to last. Most importantly, it would stand as proof that when you build something with love, integrity, and mutual respect, it doesn't matter what critics might say. What matters is the life you create together, one choice, one day, one moment of courage at a time.